Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first virtual meeting in my life. I'm sure those of you younger folks have been doing this a long time, and I look forward to the experience, and I'm sure everyone will still feel free to discuss and state your opinions, even though we can't necessarily see everyone's body language. So let me also give a special thanks to Mike, Jeff, Kathleen, and everyone who's holding down the fort at RSIC during these days. Thank you for all your work. The first item of business is to adopt the proposed agenda. Are there any comments or additions to the proposed agenda?
Alan, you're muted.
May I have
Ron, can I ask one question about the agenda? Are we incorporating the March agenda, or was it just the new agenda that was sent out? Like I'm a little, I know we got the current agenda, but was there anything? Because when I linked to the documents, right, obviously some of them point back to the March meeting day. So are we incorporating parts of that, or is it just the new agenda?
Alan, this is Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing. Really the item that we carried over from the March agenda is the AIP SIOP.
Okay.
So that's why that document is in there for both the March meeting and the April meeting. But
understood.
But that's reflected on the current agenda. So.
Right. Understood. All right.
Yeah. But otherwise, no, nothing else.
Yeah.
All right, then, may I have a motion to adopt the proposed agenda?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adopting the proposed agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Thank you. As part of the welcome to the meeting, let me now recognize Mike to introduce our new team from Makita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I think we're aware, we have a couple of new team members from Makita that are joining us, and they're on the call with us. I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but as far as who they are, we have Allie Wallace Stone and Leroy Brantley from Makita that will now be primarily the day-to-day folks on our account. Peter Woolley will still be carries over as a member of the team, and he's on the call as well. But I would turn it over to Allie and Leroy and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves to everybody.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Yes.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. As Mike mentioned, my name is Allie Wallace Stone. I'm a partner at Makita and have been with the firm for 12 years. I moved out to Chicago in 2015 and opened our Chicago office, and then subsequently just recently moved back to our headquarters outside of Boston. And I coach our Emerging and Diverse Manager Investment Committee. And I'm also on our Defined Contribution Investment Committee. And I work with a number of our large plans, including the Illinois State Board of Investment, which is about a $20 billion pension fund, as well as a large corporate plan that is comparable in size to your fund. So I really look forward to working with you, and please don't hesitate to reach out if we can be of assistance. Let's turn it over to Leroy. Do you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Can everyone hear me? I'm having some video issues on my end right now.
We can hear you fine.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. And I'll look to rectify the video part as the meeting progresses. My name's Allie. My name is not Allie. My name is Leroy Brantley. I've been in the investment consulting business for about 20 years now, and along with Allie, I co-chair the Emerging and Diverse Manager Committee, and I also sit on the Endowment and Foundation Committee. In addition to my work at Makita on large state plans like the $40 billion State of Connecticut plan, I also serve as a trustee for the $80 billion Mass Prem pension plan here in Massachusetts, and I've done so for the last 15 years after serving 7 years as a board member. I look forward to working with you.
It is good to meet you both. Look forward to seeing you in person at future meetings.
Super, thank you. And we also have Peter Woolley on the telephone, as Mike touched on earlier as well.
Hi, Peter. We have met you and look forward to seeing you again also.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Great. Mr. Chairman, if I could, before we get into the business of this meeting, just a couple of things I'd like to hit on prior to getting into that, if that's okay.
Yes, fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to echo, Mr. Chairman, what you had indicated about the staff, I would like to, especially given that we have all the commissioners with us, I would like to thank
Bill Taunton
is now joining.
I would like to, Bill, just to give you an idea where we are. We just all we've done so far is adopted the agenda, and our new team members from Makita had introduced themselves, and I was just giving a couple of updates prior to getting started. So we haven't gotten into the meat of anything. Just to echo the comments and just to say how proud I am of our staff, Mr. Chairman, and how they've been able to step up during this crisis. I can tell you that, we thankfully that we had planned for something like this from both a managing the portfolio perspective, which Jeff will get into a little bit later on, but also from having the ability to continue operations without interruption. Our staff has primarily been working remotely for, it seems like it's a few weeks, but it seems like 6 months at this point. And I can say that to my knowledge, we haven't missed a beat. Our people have been continuing to work every day while a lot of them are juggling other responsibilities at home, like homeschooling, which, I can tell you that from personal experience, I echo the comments that we don't pay teachers enough as an aside. And that, that as far as I'm concerned, that they should get 100% of their pay in retirement, but that's an issue for another day. But anyway, just really to congratulate our staff and just tell you how proud I am of them and their ability to carry on and to make this work without any interruption during this time. As you also wanted to give as far as getting this meeting together, give a special recognition. You mentioned Kathleen, but also to Eric Baker, a member of our IT staff who has been here and has really been able to help us coordinate getting all these moving parts together so that we can have this meeting, and which is certainly an important one with the May 1st deadline looming for the adoption of the AIP, and also given where we are and the turmoil that we've seen in the markets, having some direction as to what policy portfolio that we're attempting to manage to, and also and so as far as the asset allocation goes, and also making sure that the commission is aware and understands the actions that we've been taking to address the COVID crisis and the corresponding market fallout. Just by matter of housekeeping, Mr. Chairman, just so that we can kind of keep it clear on the minutes, whenever commissioners second motions or make motions, if you could just try to remember to say who you are. We only have like we can only see 4 screens at a time. That's one of the limits of Teams. So we're pretty sure as to who it is, but if you could just try to make sure to identify yourself, that would be helpful for us to be able to keep up with the minutes of the meeting. So, but otherwise, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have initially. So turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mike regarding those items? Okay, then we'll move on to the major business of this meeting. As I see it, sorry, I'm one step ahead of myself. The next item is not the major item of business for this meeting, but rather it is a call for nominations. As you know, the terms of the chair and the vice chair expire June 30th. So in recognition of this, I'm seeking nominations with the vote to be held at the next meeting. So in other words, nominations remain open until the time of the vote at the next meeting. So first, I ask for nominations for the chair of the commission. Rebecca, do you have a nomination?
I do. And in fact, I might as well just go out and throw a nomination out for the chair and for the vice chair. I would like to nominate Bill Hancock to fill the role of chair, and I would actually like to nominate Ron Wilder to fill the role of vice chair.
I'll second that.
Okay, so one young fellow and one old head so far.
I move the nominations be closed and they be elected by acclamation.
I'll second that too.
That's great.
Are there further nominations for chair? Are there further nominations for vice chair at this time? Okay, as chair, I ask that nominations remain open. The parliamentarian can tell me if that's not in order, given the motion to cease nominations.
I'll lean back on my parliamentary experience from across the street, Mr. Chairman, and I think that the chair has some discretion as to when to take that motion, when to call the question on that motion. So if you would like to leave that open just to make sure that everybody has some time to mull those nominations over, and I think that would be certainly in order.
Okay, then I will adopt that power of the chair and state that the nominating process will remain open until the time that we vote at the next meeting. And I'm certainly open to hearing discussion and happy to discuss nominations with you during the meantime. Further discussions about the nominations? Thank you very much. Regrettably. Okay, so now we move to the main item of business of this meeting, the consideration of the combined SILP AIP. As you recall, we began discussion of this new plan early in 2019, And we've reached consensus in previous meetings about some of the key details, such as the choice of the reference portfolio and the items and the weights to be included in the policy portfolio. And some more of the details about the role of commissioners versus the role of the CIO and CEO. In my view, this is a big item, represents a big improvement over our planning process in the past. And so I look forward to our discussion today. And I recognize Mike to lead the discussion of this plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you indicated, we began this process, I believe, more than a year ago. And, I think, trying to, reground ourselves and orient ourselves really towards what the goal of this process was in the beginning. This idea really germinated out of the thought of simplifying the asset allocation, the policy asset allocation, and or in other words, a long-term strategic asset allocation, from one that contained 18 different asset classes, some with policy or target weights of 3% or less, down to, and distill that down to something that was more simple, and so that really that would create a gravitational pull as far as a policy allocation goes, to create a gravitational pull towards simplicity, and really with the hopes that to the extent that we would add complexity in the actual portfolio versus the policy portfolio, that we would really expect for that complexity to have to prove itself and be beneficial to the portfolio in regards to expected return and risk. So, this was a very deliberative process on the commission's part. And also, one of the goals of the commission was to be able to accurately, or to have a greater understanding of how various decisions and who those decisions were made by, whether it be the commission or the staff, impacted the performance of the overall portfolio, and to give the commission a greater look through and ability to judge that decision-making process. So as part of that, we've developed this portfolio framework that really consists of 4 different benchmarks, so to speak. One being the reference portfolio, which would be a simple stock bonds portfolio that would serve as a risk barometer for the overall portfolio. And then a policy portfolio that would diversify past those 2 asset classes and gain some benefit and expected return through diversification. And that policy portfolio would also serve as the long-term strategic asset allocation of the portfolio. And then also have an implementation benchmark, and which recognizes that the commission would see some value or sees value in the staff's ability to manage the different weights of the asset classes of the portfolio differently than the policy portfolio. And also that there may be sub-asset classes that exist in the complex portfolio that we have now, that roll up into these larger buckets within the 5 asset class portfolio, but recognizing that at times there would be benefits to having those types of exposures. For example, high yield within the bonds allocation of the policy portfolio, but not actually requiring those sub asset classes to be an always on implementation. So creating that implementation benchmark really would capture the decisions of how to weight the portfolio differently, and also the exposures of within those larger buckets of those kind of bigger asset classes.
Is now exiting.
Then we would have obviously the performance of the actual portfolio, which would represent not only the way that the portfolio was weighted differently and the exposures were different than the policy portfolio, but would also demonstrate in the comparison between the actual portfolio and the implementation portfolio, would really demonstrate the value that the staff is being able to create through investment manager selection. The difference between this approach and the approach that we have currently is that the approach that we have currently now is we have a policy portfolio and we have an actual portfolio, and we compare those two. And that the policy portfolio now, what that comparison really gives us is it combines the effects of both weighting the portfolio differently and weighting the portfolio differently and the exposures of the portfolio differently, and the combined effect of that, as well as manager selection. And so we thought that there would be value to the commission in being able to break out and for the commission to be able to see those different decisions, because it may be that otherwise it may be that what you would get now, within the policy portfolio, the effects of one may compensate for the other, and it doesn't really give the commission a good understanding of our decision making and how we're ultimately implementing the portfolio. So giving the commission a much greater look through. So as the commission proceeded to consider these things, the commission reached consensus on the reference portfolio being a 70% global stocks portfolio and a 30% bonds portfolio represented by the Barclays aggregate. Then it reached consensus on a simplified 5 asset class policy portfolio, and also ultimately reached consensus on the kind of the ranges and the sub asset classes that would give the staff the ability to weight the portfolio and expose the portfolio differently than the policy allocation. And we attempted to incorporate those things into the SIOP, and also attempted to, the best we could, track and provide a record in the SIOP of that decision-making process, so that, one, it's documented for us for us to be able to go back and look at in the future, but also would serve as a record for new commissioners to coming in to be able to understand how we reached the decisions that we collectively reached in regards to the asset allocation. We also saw that there was benefit in, we've had 2 documents that have existed, 2 kind of controlling documents that have existed separately, one being the SIOP and one being the AIP. And we also thought that there would be some benefit by combining those 2, because statutorily, there's requirements in the AIP that really seem to be more kind of investment policy statement related and permanent in nature. And that there were also parts of the SIOP that seem to be more temporary in nature. And by combining those 2, we would avoid the kind of finding ourselves with there being inconsistencies between those 2 documents. We were able to do that. We presented the combined AIP SIOP to the commission for a first look at our December meeting. We received comments from the commission on that combined AIP and SIOP in the interim between the December meeting and the March meeting. I attempted to incorporate as many of those comments as I could into the document, and to the extent that I felt that those comments were consistent with the commission's understanding of the actions that it had taken over the course of all of those meetings. We were set to present or to consider that combined SIOP and AIP at the March meeting, but where we found ourselves though was in considering the asset allocation and the various portfolio benchmarks, and that was taken over the course of several meetings in 2019. We were utilizing 2019 capital market expectations. And because of the strong performance of markets in 2019, there was a significant impact, or a pretty significant impact, of those capital market expectations in January that we had available in March. As far as the return expectations, we were attempting to incorporate the latest view of those capital market expectations into the document. And there was a point in regards to the policy, the expected return, the volatility and probability of exceeding 7.25 of the policy portfolio, where there was some miscommunication between us and Makita. We understood the numbers that they provided us to be a reflection of the return expectations of just the 5 asset class portfolio, that policy portfolio that we've had reached consensus on. But I think in an effort to be, for lack of a better word, intellectually honest, I think Makita was operating under the understanding that we were intended for Portable Alpha to remain a component of, and to use that as an implementation method in the actual portfolio. And they incorporated the expected impact of Portable Alpha into the numbers that we provided us. And so there was a difference between the return expectation of that 5 asset class portfolio with Portable Alpha and the 5 asset class portfolio without Portable Alpha. And the difference being 7.41 expected return versus a 7.22 expected return. Some marginal differences, a little bit of difference in volatility, but also an impact to that probability of whether or not we expected that the long-term return to exceed 7.25%.
Mike, this is Ed. Just to be clear, could you define at this point what you define Portable Alpha as?
Yes. Portable Alpha is the exposure that we have to basically to Portable Alpha, our hedge fund exposure, Ed. That's the asset. It's the implementation method by which we use the
combination of hedge funds and synthetic exposure. Correct. So you earn excess return from your hedge fund over a cash rate, and you gain your market exposure, so your equity or fixed income exposure synthetically. So that combination is what we refer to as Portable Alpha.
Right, and the difference being that a portion of the cash that we would have to support the overlay, instead of all of that cash being used to support the overlay, a portion of that cash is actually invested in the Portable Alpha hedge funds. So, and then the other remains in cash with significant understanding of the liquidity constraints and those types of things. So it really wasn't until the meeting, actually we were in the meeting, that we understood that the return expectation of Makita for the policy allocation included Portable Alpha. And in an attempt to also be intellectually honest, for lack of a better word, we decided that it would be best to ensure that we had the right information in the document. So that's why we delayed the consideration of the document until this point. Given that the return expectation based on the 2020 capital market expectations was below the assumed rate of return, I developed 2 options for the commission to consider, which are in the document now, labeled option 1 and option 2. Option 1 leaves the 5 asset class simple portfolio in place as the policy or long-term strategic asset allocation, and recognizes that as long-term investors, that we really should not be making long-term strategic asset allocation decisions based on annual volatility in the capital market expectations. Also recognizing that the world that we find ourselves in today is significantly different from most likely from an expected return perspective as it was in 2020, as it was at the beginning of 2020. I think it would be, we can reasonably expect that capital market expectations where they restruct today would be significantly different and most likely significantly improved, and probably be much more in line with the 2019 capital market expectations. Also, we recognize that the actuaries are recommending that the assumed rate of return be lowered from 7.25 to 7 to take effect July 1st, 2021. So if you think about the blended return or the blended assumed rate of return over that time period, the even at a 7.22, we would be comfortably above that assumed rate of return. But I think most importantly, the recognition that that we should not be making long-term strategic asset allocation decisions based on short-term capital market expectations really is the driver of option one, and to me makes option one the one that is most consistent with our values and our role as long-term investors. But I also provided an option two by which we would maintain portable alpha in the policy allocation. And that would get you the 7.41% rate of return and the corresponding volatility, and would have that portfolio would have a greater than 50% probability based on 2020 capital market expectations of exceeding the assumed rate of return. Again, that's certainly the commission can pick either option or whatever ultimately it desires in that regard. I am in favor, just so it's clear, we are in favor of option one. We've discussed it with our Makita team. I believe that they are in favor of option one. We've also reached out to the actuaries to make sure that they are comfortable with the commission picking either option one or option two. They indicate that they are, and they certainly understand and respect our view of, as long-term investors, we should probably be looking to do option one. Ultimately, I think there's maybe still some, at least in some part, some thought that there's some improvement to the document that could be made in regards to the explanation of our decision-making process. I am certainly not opposed to that in any way. I'm suffering under no delusion that I'm the best writer in the world and that I have completely and totally captured the commission's decision-making process. But the thing that I think that we would ask the commission is that, where we find ourselves right now, the market volatility and the market turmoil, I think to the extent that the commission would want to continue any type of discussion around the description of the decision-making process, I don't think we really have a strong view on one way or the other. However, we are asking that the commission reach a resolution on the the policy allocation and all the asset allocation decisions that have been made in the document, because where we find ourselves right now from a market perspective, we really need to have that direction. The new policy allocation will certainly provide us with a gravitational pull towards simplicity. And we want to ensure that as we see opportunities to shift the portfolio that reveal themselves during this market volatility, that we're doing it in a way that is consistent ultimately with the asset allocation that the commission is in favor of. Because the last thing that we want to do is make changes based on where we're feeling the pull of the 18 asset class complex asset allocation and then the commission later adopts something different, or even adopts this 5 asset class policy allocation, and we have to change the portfolio again. So we are, that is the kind of the driving force of us wanting to bring some resolution to this matter. I think we've certainly spent a tremendous amount of time, both with the commission and outside of commission meetings, working on this. I think that ultimately it achieves the overall goal of providing a more simplified policy allocation that I think will ultimately serve us better. I think the portfolio framework provides the commission with a much greater degree of look through into the portfolio and ability to judge decision making. And I think it achieves achieves a lot of those goals and really points us in a very beneficial direction ultimately for the performance of the portfolio. So there are probably a few technical, regardless of what happens in regards to today, there's a few technical corrections that would need to remain to be done. We've gone over this thing with a fine tooth comb a number of times, but I think that there's a few technical things that may need to be corrected, but nothing I think of import. Also, there's a reference towards the beginning of the document of a return expectation of 7.41. That would need to be adjusted to conform to whatever option that the commission ultimately adopts. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I am open to any questions.
All right. As we proceed, what I suggest is that we deal with this plan with 3 steps. The first step would be to give the commissioners the opportunity to ask questions about Mike regarding his summary that he just presented. And then the second step would be to discuss and vote on our preference for option 1 or option 2 as presented in the documents. And then the final step would be having voted on the options, then to vote on the plan as presented, subject to any amendments presented by the commissioners during that discussion. So going back to the first step, do you have questions at this point for Mike about his summary?
Ron, I do, and let me kind of state, I am in favor of kind of the simplified thing. I mean, I do think language is important, and I don't, I kind of expressed this before, but the grouping. So first, just kind of language. We go bonds, then we go private debt. Then we go global equity, private equity. So that is a little bit more intuitive. I don't like just kind of the grouping of bonds and private debt, because at the end of the day, you're playing rates or you're playing credit, and you're playing different sleeves of credit. You're playing investment grade credit or high yield credit, and most private debt being a form of high yield credit. So I would just like to see the language be the same. I don't like going bonds and then private debt, or I'd like to see the language more specific and talk about rates and talk about credit, sort of separate items. Right?
Alan, can you give a little more detail on that? I just want to make sure I'm
like for example,
understanding how it would change.
Yeah, so if you look at the table 4, which is on page 13 of the document, right, where we roll, you kind of see where it's showing what rolls into bonds and what's rolling into private debt, right?
Yep.
But within the legacy allocation, you have mixed credit, right, and you have EM debt, right, which traditionally kind of falls in more of a high yield asset class, right? And same thing even now, I mean, you're kind of seeing the difference in behavior between rates and even investment grade credit, right? Like Moody's BAAs went to 500, right, in the last month, where rates went down, right? So I would prefer, and then you'll notice the language says bonds and then it says private debt, whereas when you talk about your equity classes, you have global equity, private equity. So I prefer that, you know, the language be the same, and then I'd prefer for the groupings to be a little bit more, I won't say accurate, but basically the rates part of debt versus the credit part of debt kind of grouped accordingly. Now that might change your weights a little bit, you know, in the smaller table. I like the smaller table. I don't necessarily like that grouping because you have EM debt and mixed credit, right, which are basically both traded like high yield classes, you know, and then you kind of have your investment grade bonds in there, which arguably is kind of like an investment grade credit play, but obviously performed a lot different than, you know, rates did in here.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, so it's interesting, and I see your point. You know, the symmetry that we were trying to strike was more public equity, private equity, kind of listed credit, non-listed credit. But I see what you're getting at.
And maybe that means it needs to be 6 as opposed to 5, right? In the box. I don't know.
I mean, Alan, do you think that this is, you know,
I don't want to hold it up, right?
I think what I'm thinking though is, you know, given that you're going to get that level of, you know, whenever we show the implementation portfolio, you're going to get that level of specificity in the reporting, right? Because you're going to, like, on the bonds portion, you know, within those sub asset classes, you're going to see the underlying components of those asset classes to the extent that we use them. And, you know, if you think about, I think when we think about private debt versus bonds in this framework, that really, you know, the kind of the trade-off that you're, you know, if you're, to the extent that you're underweight private debt, you know, you would likely be overweight bonds, you know. So I mean, you're going to get that kind of level of, regardless, you're going to get that level of specificity that you can see when you see the implementation portfolio in the reporting that we do. I'm just wondering if that allays your, at least for now, if that allays your concerns for now. And if it's something that we, you know, if something that we need to, because it's not, if we change the weighting and we change the groups and we just kind of, if you think about it, if that went to, you know, kind of credit versus rates, right? I think your asset classes are going to be, your sub asset classes are still pretty much going to be the same. It's just what bucket are they ultimately in, right? So, you know, but I don't know if that necessarily would drive you towards a different implementation decision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't think it necessarily changes the implementation. I think it's easier for people to follow.
Yeah.
You know, just, I mean, even if you call it public debt, private debt, you know, global equity, private equity, right?
Yeah. Alan, are you comfortable if we try first to address this with the reporting on this, and then, you know, see if we want to come back to it?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to hold this up because I know we have a deadline, and it's not like it's going to change anything from an implementation standpoint. But I do think it helps a non-finance reader understand it if language is more consistent.
Yeah,
right?
And without question. We can. I think if we show it through the reporting, Alan, and we think that we're getting to a point where, you know, the kind of the trade-off and decision-making from the implementation perspective needs to be more related to, like, for instance, are you going to, you know, if we find ourselves where the trade really is, you know, more private debt, less high yield, whatever, then, you know, we can always group those. If we think that those ultimately are more closely related, I think we can change this, but it doesn't, I don't think it will, it's not going to impact I think ultimately where we implement, right? But if we see I think if the behavior demonstrates that it would be better grouped, then I think that's something that we could easily do without. I wouldn't see that as a strategic shift, right? That's just more of a kind of does it accurately reflect what we're doing, right?
Right. Yeah, but I mean, the only thing I would kind of argue where it does become important on the implementation, just because I think this latest crisis kind of emphasizes it again, right? Is under the hood, at the end of the day, your equities and your credit of any kind, investment grade, high yield, right? They're attached to the same cash flows, right? Versus government cash flows. And so rates behave fundamentally different than credit. And obviously within credit, you get more or less dispersion, kind of depending on the event, right? And knowing kind of within our bonds, those are our two big levers, right, to pull. You know, by separating those two, you have a better sense just from a risk, reporting standpoint. It's like, okay, how much of my bond returns are tied to credit and how much of my bond returns are tied to rates. And so I say that like if I were 26% rates and I was 7% debt or credit right now, I probably have a bond portfolio that's up this year, right? Right. If I have one that's 26 credit and 7 rates, right, I have a bond portfolio that's down this year, right? So in that regard, I mean, separating the two, even at a high level, tells me more. Even as a board member, all right, what lever am I really pulling in my off the two big levers that I have, right? How is the PM team and actually what lever are they actually pulling?
Yeah. Sure. And Alan, I agree with your thought there on that importance. And we were always going to make clear to you the dividing line between rates and credit, but I think the way you've articulated it helps give me a sense of how to go about that a little more nuanced. So I'd like to see if we can address that with the way that we present exposures, and see if we can make that clear. So hopefully our reporting team is listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And then my preference, since carrying it forward would be 1, right? I mean, again, just thinking that this document is for a broader audience, talking about portable alpha and stuff, I just think we're getting down a rabbit hole that's not beneficial to the public discussion.
Well, so I have a question about the portable alpha and the difference between option 1 and option 2. And it's my understanding that's really the basic difference is the portable alpha component. So my question would be, if there is a determination to delay reducing the assumed rate of return to 7% for a year or two, let's say that the assumed rate of return doesn't reduce to 7% until 2022, because we don't know how deep the negative returns are going to be this year, and there's going to be some evaluation of when and if we will trigger additional contribution increases. If we recognize the significant losses for this year, and on top of that, dump another $1.5 to $2 billion into the unfunded liability, if we're approaching triggering a contribution increase in the next year, then there may be some interest in delaying that 7% reduction until 2022 or 2023. I don't think it would go beyond that. So my question is, under option 1, I think portable alpha is allowed. It's just not a mandate. Does your preference for option 1 over option 2, is that impacted at all by a delay in the reduction in the assumed rate of return?
No. So Peggy, this is Jeff. If we have the style of or the magnitude of losses that would likely bring us to that point, the benefit, if there is a benefit to that, is that it will improve the forward returns more than likely. And if the losses are considerable, then it would have a considerable positive impact on the forward expected return. So I don't know that those that problem necessarily is not addressed just in the natural order of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and even like Peggy, even like notwithstanding that, even if you thought about this from the standpoint of the 2020 capital market expectations were prevailing throughout that period of time, by delaying the going from 7.25 to 7, if you think about over that extended period of time and what that blended assumed rate would be, that doesn't materially impact that blended assumed rate, and I would still even be comfortable with us being able to achieve that with the 2020 capital market expectations over a long period of time.
Okay, and then as a follow-up, this is really more about Makita's timeline. Given that we don't know what our June 30th returns are going to be, and a return at any given day really shouldn't impact the portfolio long term, but it does impact our reporting fairly significantly. So not knowing what those returns are going to be June 30th, after June 30th, when and how frequently will Makita update their capital markets assumption for that forward-looking potential recovery?
Allie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, Allie, you want to take that question?
Me too. So we update our capital markets assumptions on an annual basis. So typically right after our calendar year ends, so December 31st, we start incorporating all the prior year's valuations into our capital markets assumptions. There's been one time in history where we have done it intra-year, and that was in 2008. So we experienced such valuation declines in the equity markets that it warranted a revision in our capital markets assumptions. The team responsible for that at Makita has been evaluating whether or not that's warranted in light of what's transpired in the markets most recently. And given the volatility that we experienced, we don't think that it's prudent for us to revise our capital markets assumptions at this point, because they could become obsolete the next day in light of the volatility in the markets. But we are continuously assessing that to determine if it makes sense to do so. And if it does, we will circle back. But there could be a revision between now and year end. Otherwise, you can anticipate that we'll produce our 2021 capital markets assumptions in January or February.
Okay, and I am interested in that timeline because Mike and Jeff, as you know, we have to present the recommendation to the General Assembly by January, and our board is scheduled to meet on June 3rd. It's my expectation that our board, given the current volatility, and we don't know what the June 30th returns are going to be, is that they are going to defer until the December board meeting on making that official recommendation. So I think it would be very helpful for that exercise for us to have updated capital markets assumptions, closer to the latter part of the year, if markets would indicate that it's appropriate timing. So if you could keep me updated on the progress and the outlook of the potential for that, I would appreciate it.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, Peggy, and one of the things that we talked to Danny and Joe yesterday from GRS, and one of the things, because we wanted to ensure, as we said, that there was a that they had a level of comfort with this, and they have a little bit of a benefit that they obviously work with a number of different plans, and consultants update capital market expectations at various times. When we were with Aon, they did them quarterly. Makita does them once a year. There's no comment on what's necessarily the appropriate time, but they get the benefit of those capital market expectations kind of across a couple of different perspectives too, which I think is beneficial and will be certainly beneficial to the PIBA board, because it's not just hours that the GRS will be looking at, but also they'll have multiple data points to look at too. So
Great, thank you.
Let me ask you a question. Jeff, for you and particularly for future CFOs, if we go with option one, is Portable Alpha is it gonna look like a redheaded stepchild? It seems to me it's always been certainly in recent years, it's been an integral part of our strategy rather than an afterthought. And is it?
Yes.
But both of them are just a nuance, but my only concern is if we do with option one, then it looks like you're making a non-standard decision to use Portable Alpha rather than Portable Alpha being a strategic part of what we do.
Sure, and Reynolds, that's a good question. Thank you. So I hope I've been clear in articulating this, that I think that Portable Alpha is a feature of our plan that I intend to continue to use to the extent it is permitted, and it is explicitly permitted in the draft document. So I don't, for me, it is a uniquely attractive method of implementation that is one of the few ways that we have of exploiting low interest rates. And the way that it works is if to the extent that our hedge funds can generate a return in excess of LIBOR, 3-month LIBOR, which is right now 1.17%, the incremental return accrues to our benefit. In terms of that is where excess return comes from in Portable Alpha. So while that hurdle is exceedingly low right now, that to me makes a Portable Alpha strategy very attractive, and I don't see higher rates for the near or potentially even intermediate term at this point. So I don't see an issue with this recommendation, that makes that an allowable decision of the CIO. I want to make sure that I'm being as upfront and transparent as I can be, that it is a feature that I don't intend to unwind anytime soon. I think it maybe if rates get back to 6%, 7%, then we don't need this in the plan, because now we can get 6 or 7%, from the bond market without taking a lot of risk. So this is one of those ways of turning low rates are not great for pension systems, but it's one of the handful of ways that we can turn what is not normally good into something that can be a wind at our, the wind at our backs. Frankly, in a world that doesn't have too many of those right now. Is that responsive, Reynolds, and helpful?
It is. Will your attitude towards it be any different depending on which option we take?
Absolutely not.
And Reynolds, just a reminder that we were whenever the commission reached consensus on the 5 asset class simple portfolio, there was a choice between 5 with, even back then, I think it was back at the September meeting, there was a choice between 5 asset class with Portable Alpha and 5 asset class without, and it was our preference even at that time that just be an implementation decision rather than an always on, because we wanted, so this is, option 1 is right in line with, where we've been up the whole time. So.
Okay.
I think in the past that the commission became accustomed to the category of hedge funds but historically, we didn't use the term portable alpha in presenting hedge funds. And so I think in some ways, Jeff, am I right in this, that we have been using portable alpha previously, but we just didn't refer to it as directly? Is that right?
Well, back in, and I'm going to use who the CIO at the time was, because I think that's the most useful way to think chronologically here. When Bob Borden was the CIO, we used portable alpha, and then when Herschel Harper was the CIO, we stopped using the whole portable alpha structure, but we kept the hedge funds. And during those years, we called that portfolio low beta hedge funds. And then when I took over, we kind of reassembled the pieces of portable alpha and put that back together. So yes and no, and I hope that short vignette helps you kind of understand the pattern of this over the years.
So in that sense, some of what we call low beta hedge funds was employed as portable alpha?
Yes, that hedge fund pool, not entirely, and not each one of those hedge funds in the pool, but there was a hedge fund pool back, I believe, as early as 2007 that was a part of the portable alpha hedge fund program. Think of most of that pool remaining intact over the course of the next 5 years. And then when Herschel decided he didn't want to have that portable alpha as an implementation in the portfolio, we kept most of those hedge funds. And even though we no longer had the market exposure at the time, in order for that combination to be called portable alpha. So that I would say probably 60% of that pool has remained, and that's me guessing the amount for the last 13 years. And over that time period, it has, there have been good years and years that are a little more challenging, but over that length of time, you would look at this and you would say, yes, that has definitely worked. And it works in part because, as a refresher, we're not making heroic high risk allocations in that pool. We're really trying to go for persistently generating a return that beats the LIBOR cash rate. And, so we've done that. And when we work on that portfolio, we're always doing it from that sense of how do we drive returns without, taking risk that takes us out of that comfort zone. So.
Thank you. My own thought about the 5 asset class portfolio is that to me, it seems better for the long run approach to investing, given that many of the implementation decisions will vary depending on market conditions. And so, and if the reporting process in the future will continue to allow us to see items separately in the reporting, component items separately in the reporting, then in my mind, the 5 asset class portfolio is the way to go from the point of view of a long-term investor, as our commission is designed to be.
Great.
Are there further questions of Mike and Jeff regarding the plan? Okay, this is not the end of the discussion, but let me then move us to the second stage of our discussion of the plan, and that is to express our opinion about whether we go with option 1 or option 2. So do you have discussion about that?
Yeah, this is Bill. Yeah, I certainly support option 1. I think, as the chairman just said, that I think it meets our long-term goal of what a policy portfolio is, or how we envision it. You know, simple and less complex, and also think kind of using Portable Alpha as an implementation tool also kind of fits. I think Portable Alpha fits more into our picture of an implementation tool. You know, something that we can, that because we expect better returns, we can move away from the policy portfolio. So the final reason I would say I support option 1 is that if we adopt option 2, the volatility of option 2, which includes the 6 asset classes, if we include Portable Alpha, would now be higher than the volatility of our reference portfolio. And I'm not in favor of that. So I support option 1.
Okay, and that's Bill Condon, right?
Yes, sir.
Since we have 2 bills now.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm not. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Further discussion about whether we favor option 1 or option 2 in this revision to the plan. I think I heard someone.
Leroy Brantley
is now exiting.
Okay. Then may I have a motion? I'll put it in the favor of a motion to adopt option 1. And of course, voting against this motion would mean favoring option 2. May I have a motion to approve option 1?
You got it.
Ron, this is Ed. I will make that motion.
I'll second this, Reynolds.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adopting option 1, say aye.
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 And the chairman favors option 1. All in favor of, all opposed to selecting option 1, say no. Thank you, commissioners, for your votes on that and for the discussion of that. So now we move to the third phase, and that is the plan as a whole, and whether we approve the plan as presented.
Unknown participant is now joining.
whether we approve the plan as presented, given that we've selected option 1 as the amended version of that plan. So it's time for discussion of the plan as a whole. And I welcome comments and questions by commissioners on the plan as a whole. That's W-H-O-L-E.
I thought you were calling on me.
Yeah, this is Bill Condon again. You know, I think this document has some great improvements from prior years SIOPs, and I want to thank Mike for including many of my suggestions, especially kind of even before, you know, before in this early sections. I thought it was really important to give much more detail about the tension between achieving a 7.25% rate of return and the obstacles we face in trying to do that. Because as somebody said earlier, this document, it's really for us and for staff, but the whole state is affected by what we do. And so I think this really is a document that should be useful and readable to people throughout the state, across the street, at the General Assembly, the governor, but also state and local governments who are members and taxpayers. So I just thought that was important to describe that tension, and hence it's not easy to achieve the assumed rate of return. So I want to thank Mike for that. Mike was referring, I know at least to me, when he said somebody, you know, there's some thought about some more detail needed and other things, and so that's me, and I'm support of this thing as a whole for sure, but you know, earlier this week, you know, as Mike said, a couple of numbers might need to be changed, and because early on when discussing Table 1, it still used Makita's numbers that really were looking at our current allocation. So, and I'm just not convinced that I think I'm not convinced that all the percentages and volatilities and tables are all updated based on the plan we're really wanting to approve here. So, and I could go into more detail, but you know, the table that has that little triangle that Mike and Jeff really helped use to kind of convince me on a lot of things, you know, that hasn't been updated. So I'm not really sure where, I think I can guess, but I don't want to guess where this option 1 plan fits in that triangle. And maybe the triangle has changed some with the 2020 assumption. So I'm just not comfortable that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And this is such a foundational document to begin with, and especially this year where we're changing our entire framework. I would like that detail and some more questions answered before I approve it. So I support it, but I'm really wavering on whether I'm going to approve it today. That's it. Thank you.
This is Rebecca.
Do you have any specific changes in mind?
I'm sorry, Reynolds. Could you repeat that?
Do you have any specific changes to recommend?
I've got numerous changes to recommend and numerous questions as well. Yes, sir. I sent my red line with some questions and comments to staff or I think earlier this week.
Okay.
Hey, this is Rebecca. I'm actually kind of concerned that with your comment that some of the data is inaccurate and the numbers are wrong. And I'm just curious if you could, do you know which ones those are? Because I don't want to approve a document that has wrong numbers in it. Are we able to put those out?
Yeah, and sometimes I just question them, but Mike, the one Mike and I specifically talked about was in the discussion on table 1, right below table 1. So that looks like it's around page 6 on my red line, but that may be a little adjusted because of my red line.
Yeah, Bill, and that's when I was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's when I said that there was a number that we would, early on in the document that we would need to make conform to whether we chose option 1 or option 2. And that's the one. So it's on the unred line document, it's on page 6. So I would just update that language as I indicated to conform to option 1, the verbiage that we have in option 1.
Yeah, so we talked about that specifically. I'm just not, in reading this, I'm not convinced there's not other things like that would need to change.
Okay. Well, I'll ensure that I will go through this with a fine tooth comb, but I think that's the only number that I think needs to be that would need to be updated. And just so that the commission understands, the only numbers that you would see in here that were, so like if you think about if we kind of go through the tables, table 1 is the projected funded status, and that's based on Makita's capital market expectations, but that analysis is done by James, and that was updated with the new capital market expectations and the 630 valuation. If you look at the table 2 on page 7, that's the same thing. And those are reflective of the 5 asset class and have always been reflective of the 5 asset class portfolio, not the 5 asset class portfolio with Portable Alpha. So those have always been consistent. The only time that there was ever a inconsistency was just whenever we got the updated capital market expectations and we attempted to incorporate the new return expectations into the document. And again, that was just a miscommunication between us and Makita, but other than updating that number in the beginning of the document to conform with choosing option 1, that's the only number that would need to be updated. On the charts for table 3 and for table 3 and table 5 on pages 12 and 14 respectively. Those are and I'm trying to show you those. I was trying to show in those documents what the commission was looking at the time. I was trying to be reflective of what the commission was looking at the time. And then, by providing the explanation in table 5, below table 5 in option 1, that we don't need to change anything based on capital market expectations, because this is what we saw of the change in capital market expectations. I think is consistent with that, because we were, again, trying to incorporate the record of what we were doing. This is what the commission, when the commission reached consensus on the 5 asset class portfolio, that's what it was looking at in table 5. So, but you know, like I said, other than that one number, that's the only number that would be the one number at the beginning of the document. That's the only number that would need to be changed.
Well, I think that was trying to be responsive to a desire that you had stated, a preference for helping those that come to this later on understand the process by which we arrived at at this course of action. So if it's incongruous, you know, with where we are today, please understand it was an attempt to fulfill that request.
Yeah, to be reflective of what the commission was actually, to create the record of what the commission was actually looking at the time. And I think one of the things that struck me that may be, I think, beneficial, because, you know, regardless of what we put in this document, it's going to be a summary of the actions that the commission took. And, you know, to the extent that you summarize, you're going to leave out something inevitably, just because of that's the actionable part of it being a summary. So what I thought that I would have done is, so that we can create that, you know, quote unquote record of the decision-making process, that I would have built a compendium of, and put it all in one document of the presentations that were made to the commission concerning its decision-making as it went through, and also include the corresponding parts of the minutes of those meetings, so that somebody who comes back later can go to one document and trace the historical analysis of what the commission considered when it reached consensus on these things.
Okay, thank you for your comments and those answers. Is there a further discussion of the plan before we move to a vote? Okay, Mike, could I get you to read the motion? And then I will ask if someone will move that.
Your computer.
Yeah, hold on one second, Mr. Chairman. Let me pull it up on the on my computer. Sorry, did not have that handy. Okay. There we go. Got it. Mr. Chairman, the motion would be to adopt the recommendation of the CEO and CIO to approve the consolidated annual investment plan and statement of investment objectives and policies as set forth in the red number document on pages, and we'll come back and insert those pages later, and incorporating option 1 as set forth in section 3D of the AIP SIOP and discussed during the meeting for fiscal year 2021 effective July 1st, 2020, and to authorize staff to finalize the AIP SIOP by making any technical revisions or formatting edits consistent with the action taken by the commission.
May I have a motion to that effect?
I'll make the motion. This is Ed.
I'll second that motion. This is Bill Hancock. I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And the chair says aye. All opposed to the motion say no.
No.
Okay. I judge by the voice vote that the ayes carried the motion, and so we have adopted the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And thanks for the discussion by the commissioners, the questions, the answers. I think this is a big step forward for us in our moving towards a more strategic approach as commissioners. I think this will be a good time to have a short break. So it's about 11:01. I suggest we resume at 11:11.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill Thornton
is now exiting.
Bill Condon
is now joining.
Thank you.
All right, I would like to resume the meeting at this point. I'm assuming that everyone is able to stay connected. If any of you are having problems with connection or anything, please let Kathleen or someone else know. We can help fix it. The next item of business is the really two sub items: the investment performance update and the delegated investment report. And Jeff, I would ask you to lead that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're sounding fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to focus my time on giving you an update on the challenging situation facing investors today. The pandemic
I lost your voice, Jeff.
Yeah, I lost it too.
That was my gift to you. So apologies. I was trying to advance the slides, and I think I inadvertently took myself offline. So I was just simply saying that this is creating what economists are expecting to be the most severe recession in what could be 90 years. How this plays out, though, is ultimately going to be dependent upon a host of variables, many of which even today are still not knowable. What we do know, though, is asset prices up and down the risk spectrum have reacted severely to the pandemic, giving us what was the most volatile and painful 1 month period in the S&P 500's 70-year history. And I'm going to refer
participant is now joining.
I'm going to refer to a 1 month period of time. I think the actual time was 23 trading days. I'm just calling that 1 month. So the federal government has responded in some very meaningful ways, as have other governments around the world. And most notably last week, the Fed announced an array of thoughtful programs aimed effectively at unthawing the credit markets. And these have been very well received for a good reason. The result of all of this really is that we have an extreme divergence of potential paths for the economy and markets. And unfortunately, until that range of potential outcomes narrows, I see markets remaining quite volatile. All this points to me, to the critical importance of some actions that we've taken, most notably managing our liquidity so that we are in a position of strength, not only as it relates to meeting our benefit obligations, but when when opportunities arise for us to play offense, that we will be in a very strong position to do so. So I'm really going to focus on 3 areas. One, what's our playbook for managing through times like this? 2, what is the impact on markets and therein on our plan? And then 3, how are we thinking about new opportunities that are arising as a result of what's going on? So what's our playbook? It's pretty straightforward. We're approaching this with the 3-phase action plan. In phase 1, we have very much focused on liquidity management. I view this as the element that is absolutely critical. If you don't operate in a time like this from a strong liquidity position, you can become a forced seller. You can lose your ability to react to opportunities. If you become a forced seller, you're likely selling assets at the worst possible time, and your mistake creates somebody else's opportunity, and we're not going to make that mistake. So in phase 1, we manage our liquidity. I'll get to these in detail in just a moment. Phase 2 is where we look at the impact that this is having on markets and on our portfolio. And during this phase, what really starts to come into focus for us is where we think the most attractive opportunities lie across markets. And then phase 3 is where we have the liquidity, we understand where the opportunities lie, and we are in a position to take action. So before I get into some of the detail on this, I do want to let you know, a couple of years ago, I set up internally what I'll call a liquidity fire drill with our investment team. And this was back when North Korea, this takes you back, when North Korea was testing missiles and its nuclear capabilities. It was firing missiles across the Sea of Japan. And I thought it was important to stress test our liquidity in case that situation escalated. So we gathered as a team. I told them to imagine North Korea struck Japan with a nuclear weapon. We simulated an overnight 30% equity decline, a freezing of the credit markets. And I told them we needed to figure out how we were going to manage our liquidity, maintain our exposures. So we did that. We went through that exercise, and in early March of this year, Brian Moore and I convened a very small team in that same room that we did that tabletop exercise. And benefiting from the work that we did a couple of years ago, in a little more than an hour, we drew up our liquidity plan for this current situation. And since then, as a result of having undergone that fire drill and being able to take those lessons, bring those lessons forward, we've been in a position where we've been able to just confidently execute that plan. And as a result, today, we are in a very, very strong liquidity position. One of the ways that we like to talk about how much liquidity we have is to think about how big of a drawdown we are prepared for. And Brian Moore looked this up the other day, and I believe that we tested our liquidity and it stood up to a 50% decline in markets from current levels. So back to phase 1 here. So our liquidity plan had many components that you can see here. One thing I want to call your attention to, and this is one of the benefits of having done this, pulled this together in a pretty expedited time frame, is that when things began to accelerate and you could really see markets having a tremendous struggle understanding the value of risky assets, I started to worry about whether the financial system was going to close down, kind of quarantine itself altogether. And as a result of that concern, we made the decision, which is something that I can't remember us having done before. We decided to fund the benefit payments at the end of March, in the middle of the month, just in case this got so bad that we couldn't keep markets open. So we have really focused not only on the liquidity with which to take action in the portfolio, but we are very focused on the commitment to make benefit payments. So as a result of the actions we've taken, as I alluded to, we have more than enough liquidity to defend our portfolio, but and that puts us in a position where we can play offense as well. And I'll hit on that more in a moment. So as we shift to phase 2 and look at the impact on markets, I'm going to share quickly a couple of charts with you to help you understand what really was an extreme risk elevation, a sudden and extreme risk elevation in markets. And I'm going to show you this in 3 charts. This chart that you're looking at now shows you the over 1 month periods of time, the historical drawdowns in the S&P 500 during its 70-year history. And you can see way over on the right-hand side that we set a new record. It's not a great record to set, but this was a new record. This was the steepest drawdown over that amount of time that we've seen in the S&P. This next picture here is, this is a little tougher to explain. It's the absolute value of daily changes in the S&P added together over a 1 month period. And you can see that, so it treats up 7% and down 7% the same way. You can see here, this is another look at the same phenomenon, that this was the most absolute volatility that we've seen over that stretch of time in those 70 years. And the third chart that I want to share with you is credit spreads. I apologize. I didn't realize that I'd failed to make the type at the bottom legible. What you're looking at here is just 20 years of credit spreads for US high yield. On the right, you can see spreads blew out by 750 basis points over 22 days. During the great financial crisis in 2008, spreads increased more. They increased by 1,150 basis points, but that was over 68 days. So even though in the current environment, the spreads did not get as wide as they did during the financial crisis, the speed of the move and the magnitude of the move had about twice the slope of that which we saw in the fall of 2008. So let's look more closely at specific markets. The way that I'm showing this to you is to show you both the decline from February, I believe it was February 19th to March 24th in the first, or March 23rd in the first column, the recovery that began on March 24th in the second column, and I'm gonna walk you through this. So these are rank sorted, and the thing I would have you note is that the top 3 on the way down are 3 different forms of equity. This is not terribly surprising. The thing that was surprising was that the real estate and infrastructure markets fell more. I think that was the unwinding, a bit of an unwinding of the high dividend trade. In the middle, you'll see the credit markets that were down a lot, but less than equities. And then at the bottom, you can see investment grade corporates, core bonds, and treasuries. Those are what we think of as core fixed income. Those were down the least, and in fact, treasuries were higher. So then during the recovery, almost nothing changes in terms of the rank order here. Tremendous recovery in equities at the top, 38, 31, 22%. And that very much there's a symmetry to this. And then the total during this time period really is almost striking in how equivalent these things are. The forms of equity, and this is through last Friday, we're still down almost 20%. Credit was down a little more than half that, and investment grade performed substantially better. So let me move back into phase 2 of our plan. I want to share with you how we are thinking about new opportunities in light of the damage in markets. We're thinking of opportunities in 3 main categories. And I'll say up front, not every investment is going to fit cleanly in this framework, but I think it's still a useful way of thinking through opportunities. So I'll ask you to think of Class A opportunities as those that would offer attractive returns, but may offer us lower risk in order to get those returns. Excuse me. These have a high probability of success, and this is largely because the success of these opportunities is less likely to hinge on the timing or magnitude of an economic recovery. Class B opportunities are those that are kind of lateral. Think of these as lateral moves from a risk perspective, but where we're putting ourselves in the path of really attractive forward returns. These opportunities will have more than likely some sensitivity to an economic recovery, but we expect them to work out if that recovery is modest or if that recovery takes longer to take hold. And then Class C, these are our opportunities where we are increasing our risk, and we would make these types of trades with the expectation of really superior return improvement. These are going to be the ones that most likely either need what we think of as a V-shaped recovery or a near-term recovery, or a strong recovery. And those for our thinking are usually the things that you've seen us do in the past, where in 2018, we sold bonds and bought stocks. The example I give you at the bottom is direct lending versus Treasury inflation protected securities. There's no question that these are trades that would add risk. So today, we're approaching things still somewhat cautiously. I don't have any unique inside information as to when the new cases of the virus will plateau, or when people will be back to work and no longer social distancing and quarantining and working from home. As a result, we have been spending a lot of our time looking at those opportunities that are less dependent upon economic recovery, Class A, Class B type opportunities. So phase 3 of the plan is execute. And we have executed on a limited number of opportunities thus far, some of which I have listed here. We've taken advantage of the extraordinarily elevated volatility levels in order to restructure some of our exposures and build in a hedged profile to the downside. We have also shifted some exposure in our bond portfolio from core in kind of traditional core opportunities into more targeted opportunities in mortgages and credit. We have taken up our exposure to credit. We have not made a really significant move into equity in terms of the magnitude that we did back in 2018. And the reason for that is I still read this as a much more challenging situation, largely because of the non-traditional variables at play. I do believe the federal government has responded in a way that can help reduce, not eliminate, but reduce downside risk. But I do think it is still an environment in which we need to be cautious and very thoughtful. So let me end my remarks with this. Mike and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, and we've had crises before, and we will have them again. And it's important to understand for us to approach this with a long-term time frame. And to me, that means that a crisis offers opportunity for somebody willing to look for it. I believe that the most important thing right now is that we keep a very steady hand on the rudder of our plan, and we continue to be disciplined with how we approach new opportunities. And that's just how what I believe is the right way to manage through a time like this, but frankly, to manage in all times. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions.
Jeff, just one question. Will you have any investment topics to bring up in executive session?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. My comment is just that this is such an exceptional time in the negative sense that it's comfortable to have long-range planning going on and comfortable at the same time to try to take advantage of opportunities that arise. So I appreciate your hand on the wheel about this.
Thank you.
Commissioners, questions of Jeff? Okay, Jeff, is it time now to go to the delegated investment report?
Mr. Chairman, we don't have anything for that. I think we have one investment where the 3-day review period is just closed, but it is not the 3-day review period has ended, but the investment's not closed. We can, if there's any questions, we can certainly talk. Any questions, any lingering questions about that, we'd be happy to cover those in executive session. But otherwise, we don't have anything from a delegated perspective.
All right, then, commissioners, any questions at this point before we move into executive session? All right, may I have a motion to move into executive session?
Got to redial it.
So moved. This is Bill Hancock.
And a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor of moving into executive session, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Thank you. That concludes the open session.
And Mr. Chairman, just for purposes of the recording, for the record that we're maintaining, that the justification for going into executive session is to discuss investment matters and specific investments pursuant to SC Code and SC Code Section 9-1680 and 320, and to receive any needed advice from legal counsel pursuant to the open meeting laws.